Hey there folks, it's Jimmy Stewart here, hoping this is finding you all doing well. Now today's video we're going to continue the series, the weekly series I've been doing on classic and/or vintage guitar week, and this is week number 3. And today's entry into that is going to fit both categories as well. It's a classic and it's a vintage, and I'm talking about this guy right here. This is a 1985 Steinberger. Yeah, you remember the Steinbergers from the 80s? And here's one right here. This is an early model. This is a N, and the serial number is N2049. Early 85 model. And this is actually the GP2S. Steinberger had some really weird configurations back then, and I'll go into some history of Steinberger as well with Ned, who was actually a furniture maker when he first started off, not a musician, and was helping out a fellow friend of his trying to develop a new bass guitar, and ended up starting Steinberger Sound back around '82, I think it was, out of Brooklyn, and then they moved to Newburgh, New York, and actually started producing the L1 bass. They started with a bass guitar and eventually went into 6 strings as well. So this is the GP2S, S meaning this has got the S trem on it. The earlier models, and still continued, but the first trem that Ned came up with was actually the trans trem, which was really, really cool. You'd see some of the guys like Eddie Van Halen playing one of those, David Bowie, Mike Rutherford from Genesis. There was a few. But that trans trem, you could actually lock the guitar down with the arm, and you could lock it over, and you could actually drop the tuning on these guitars, all 6 strings at the same time, which was very, very innovative and very cool. One of the only trems like that ever developed, and Ned really did some neat stuff back in the 80s. Now the GP2S, the G is for guitar, the P is for the model of this. This has got the almost like an A-frame type of body, and it's a hard rock maple body, not a graphite like the neck is. The L's were a graphite body all the way through. The 2 meaning 2 pickups, and these pickups back in the early days, this is an 85, you can tell because they have the EMG logos in the middle of the edge of the pickup, whereas the normal EMGs are up on the top. These were made specifically for Steinberger from EMG at the time. They're a high output passive pickup. They don't require a battery, and the electronics are all specifically designed for it. The S meaning this has got the S trem on it, not the trans trem. And what's really neat about the S trem is that you can lock this trem down, so you have like a hardtail version, then you can unlock it to have your floating tremolo. Very unique, very cool feature, patent pending and all that by the Steinberger company back then in the early 80s. It's a neat guitar. It's one of those guitars that people played back in the 80s that you just, people that really liked, like Eddie Van Halen and all that really used, like to use a trem bar. These were, you couldn't take them out of tune. They were just rock solid guitars, really, really innovative, and a great guitar made by Ned Steinberger back in the early 80s. So I'm going to give you an up-close tour of the GP2S, this guy right here, and let you take a look at the innovations that Ned Steinberger did in Steinberger Sound back in the early 80s. Let's have a look. So the headless horseman, or I should say the headless workhorse of the 80s, the Steinberger headless guitar. There's those EMGs and the proprietary S trem. Now these necks are actually a carbon fiber reinforced neck with no truss rod. They didn't require them. Just sturdy necks. I've seen people
claim to stand on these things, and they just do not go out of tune. There's your headless headstock there. I'm showing this as part of the up close, as you can see that the side piece there, as we go up that carbon fiber reinforced neck. Actually consider this a 0 fret, because it really is. There's no headstock, so there's no nut, and then your first fret's there. And this is actually a full scale, just like a Fender, 25.5 with 24 frets. And this is that bolt-on part of the neck onto that hard rock, that rock maple body on the GP. Another design by Ned was the fold-out leg stand or knee stand there. Really, really cool. So if you're sitting down playing the guitar, you've got a way to do it. And here's the S-Trem bridge. And you can see that lever right there. That's what locks it down and unlocks it. And those tuning keys were 18-to-1 tuning keys with a really, really cool, not really tuning key, more of a tuning mechanism. It has a 3-way mini toggle and a volume and tone control. Look at that neck. The tolerances in these necks when they built them were just amazing too. They just did a great job on the necks on these. And again, I'm showing you the worn off Steinberger logo on the side. Here's the stamp on the side of the neck. This, as you can tell, it's a Newberg model. They say Steinberger USA is marked on the side. And here's the gig bag. This came with a padded gig bag back then. Really cool. Really nice to be able to throw up on the overhead compartment on an airplane when you're traveling with it. And nicely padded. Original gig bag from '85 when I bought this guitar new. And obviously you need to use the double ball strings. Now Steinberger made them, and here's the original package I had in my case here. But I now use Diodario double balls. And the actual trem arm just screws into that S trem. And I'll show you this when I lay the guitar down to show you how it actually goes on there. It's very easy. You just screw it on there and set it up, and you're good to go. And I'll show you that switch on the back. It's like a lever that will unlock and lock that S trem. It's kind of hard to see with the black guitar, but it's right here. And you just flip that switch up, and it unlocks the... There you go. He just unlocks that, and trem is now floating.
Now, Steinberger sound, it started off when Ned was a furniture maker, designing chairs. He was a designer, actually. And he was asked to help out designing a new bass. And because he's not a musician, he looked at the guitar building on a totally different level. So he thought to himself, well, why is the tuning keys up here? Why are you having so much weight here? You know, so he decided to try to balance that guitar out, to actually take the headstock off, use the headstock weight or the tuning keys weight down in this part of the guitar to help balance that body out. Then he thought about the body itself. You know, you really don't need a big body on a guitar. On an acoustic, yes, the wood and all that actually makes a difference because that projects the sound. But on an electric guitar, basically what's projecting your sound is your pickups. So he decided to make a very slim body, just enough really to house the electronics and the pickups. And the original L's were all the proprietary graphite fiberglass mix that he developed, along with almost like the same type of coating they put on them that would be putting on boats back in the day, and even today. Just a rock solid, steady guitar. Like I said, this particular one, the GP, This actually has a hard rock maple body with the graphite, proprietary graphite neck and fingerboard. So back in the late 70s, early 80s, when Ned had decided that he designed this L guitar and revolutionized really the whole idea of a bass guitar at the time, he didn't want to build them. He was a designer, so he designed the guitar and tried to shop that design to all the different guitar makers at the time, you know, Fender and Gibson and Music Man and all those guys. And nobody took him seriously. So being in debt and trying to get this guitar developed, he decided to start his own company. And that's when he started Steinberger Sound and moved out of his Brooklyn digs and went into Newburgh, right up the Hudson River there, Newburgh, New York. Now, at that point, Newburgh was having a lot of trouble. They were losing a lot of their manufacturing. Their unemployment rate was really high. And so the city of Newburgh was giving incentives to business people to try to start up business and start to get jobs rolling again in that area. So Ned and some investors, I think there's 4 or 5 of them, they got together and personally had to sign for the loans. I think it was around $300,000 at the time to get Steinberg Sound started in the old factory that they had there in Newburgh, New York, and started building guitars. They started with the bass, like I said, and then they started going with 6 strings. And it was the musicians at the time that wanted to get one of these guitars. You know, none of the big music companies thought it was a viable guitar, and Ned thought differently, and so did the musicians at the time. They all loved this thing, and the biggest issue that Ned had at the point was trying to build them fast enough to supply the demand. And you had a lot of very famous musicians at the time just wanting these guitars. Eddie Van Halen was one of them, David Bowie was another, Mike Rutherford, David Gilmour, and others were all looking to play this guitar. And the problem that Ned had was trying to get the supply out. Just after opening the Newburgh facility, their goal was to build between 16 and 20 of these a week, and that's what they were trying to do. Initially, it didn't start off very well. It took them a while to get the machinery together and get the molds together and get all the people they had to hire, staff and what have you. So it took them a while. First few months of being in there, they couldn't make them fast enough. They just couldn't do it. If they would get 6 guitars done in a week, they were lucky. So getting 16 to 20 was really the goal. And this particular P model was, and still is, many people consider this superior to the L because it does have the hard rock maple body. Some think it has a nicer sound to it, a nicer sustain than the L's, the all graphite models. That's debatable, obviously, but the initial idea for Ned was to try to produce a guitar like the L with a wooden body to keep the cost down. So this was one of the models that was very short-lived for Steinberg Sound. They only ran these for a couple of years, and the problem was not the guitar. They sold well. Was that he couldn't get that price point. He was selling these pretty much at a loss because he was trying to keep the price down below under $1,000, and he basically couldn't do it producing these guitars for that kind of money. So they gave up the P model, and some people really seek these out because this is one of the ones they didn't make a lot of these. Not like the L. The L, they made quite a few. These were only made for a couple of years there in the Newburgh plant. And then eventually Ned, again, not being a business guy, he was a designer, and he ended up selling Steinberg Sound to Gibson. He actually sold the company to Gibson, and then Gibson moved the production of Steinberger guitars to Nashville. So if you look at the serial numbers on these, you'll see that this is an N meaning Newburgh, and then when they went to Nashville, that serial number became an NT, and then whatever the number was. And that's how you can tell a Nashville guitar compared to the prior Newberg guitars. This was my mainstay guitar from the 80s all the way up until the 2000s and beyond. I still use this guitar. It's a main recording guitar. I used this on stage for 25, 30 years. As you can tell, the Steinberger logo is almost completely wiped off of here. The early models had this smooth pick guard, and the Steinberger logo was basically just silk screened on there, so it will rub off with enough wear and tear. Later models, they actually did a engraving of that, but the early models were done like this. And it's just been a great guitar, and something I've cherished for many, many, many years, and will continue to use for many more, I hope. So, folks, well, that'll do it for today. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Classic Vintage Guitars with the '85 Steinberger GP2S. Really brings back the 80s. And if you remember Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, they both got presented one of these at the end. I remember that film. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Thank you for stopping in. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. And until next time, it's Jimmy Stewart saying so long, take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you again very, very soon. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.